Beacon Press Audio presents Faux Feminism, Why We Fall for White Feminism and How We Can Stop, by Serene Khader. This audiobook is narrated by Sharmila, Devar, published by Beacon Press Audio, 2024. Introduction. The Secret Life of an Idea. I had always imagined that I would remember exactly where I was when it happened. That the moment my phone buzzed with the text heard round the feminist world would be forever burned into my memory. But, apparently, you only remember the arrival of calamitous news when it comes out of nowhere. The final blow to abortion rights that summer day in 2022 was, instead, utterly expected. The media had already been conducting postmortems of Roe v. Wade, the 1973 case that decriminalized abortion nationwide, for several months. As for me, my entire political life had been haunted by the knowledge that this moment would come. I had never known a time when abortion rights and access were not under attack. Still, the overturning of Roe had once seemed distant enough that I could joke about it. I remember my teenage self laughing that if the government wanted my uterus so badly, I would just send it to them. So, on that hazy June day in 2022, when the Supreme Court ruled that there was no constitutional right to abortion, one thing was clear. This had been a long time coming. Feminists needed to roll up our sleeves. We needed a long-term plan. And we couldn't just assume that what we had been doing up to this point was working. The court's decision in Dobbs v. Jackson may have been designed to send pregnant people back to the 1950s, but the oral arguments surfaced an idea that could only be at home today. It was the idea that abortion was no longer necessary. Things had changed since 1973, one Supreme Court justice pointed out in their only question. There may have been a time when women needed the right to abortion, but not now. Today, women were free. The source of this freedom was about as ghastly as it gets. Safe haven laws allow birthing people to abandon their newborns in places like fire and police stations without facing criminal prosecution. If it was so easy to abandon a newborn, wasn't the ability of abortion restrictions to hinder women's access to the workplace taken care of? This question, from a Supreme Court justice, seemed to echo the words of an amicus brief filed the year before, one that pulled no punches in its argument against abortion. Safe haven laws, it said, give women total freedom from burdens of unwanted children. Much of this argument, its erasure of the pregnant body and trivialization of the experience of pregnancy and the adoption decision, was straight out of the conservative playbook. But what hit me was not the familiar misogyny. It was hearing a staunch abortion opponent claim that women were free. Since when were conservatives saying that women were free? And since when did they seem to be conceding that we should be? I'm a political philosopher. Yes, this is a job. I've even managed to convince my parents. So I'm trained to notice ideas. My superpower is seeing through public life and cultural trends to the values that animate them. And this time, I couldn't help noticing that the 2020s were a new era. One where it was no longer politically risky for a conservative darling to suggest that freedom from the responsibility of raising a child could be a good thing. The idea that women deserved freedom was decidedly not from the conservative playbook. The conservative side, in the abortion debate, had long been spouting versions of the idea that women needed to stay where we belonged, whether that meant accepting the consequences of our decisions, remaining in the kitchen, or, as the alt-right would have it, accepting that America belongs to its fathers and is owed to its sons. But instead, here was an abortion opponent suggesting that forced motherhood, yes, she used that term, and yes, it was a she, was not something women should have to undergo. The only way I could make sense of this seeming about-face was to think about the person who had argued that safe haven laws respected women's bodily autonomy in the first place. She was a pearl-wearing mom of 7, drafted to the Supreme Court from a Catholic law school, known for seeming to weave a very demanding form of motherhood seamlessly into a high-powered career. It was these bona fides of traditional white femininity that made her popular with her conservative Christian base. But Justice Amy Coney Barrett and her supporters had long been presenting her as something other than traditional. Barrett, in the eyes of her supporters, represented a new kind of woman. Barrett was the type of woman who made her own rules. She showed up to her confirmation hearing in a fuchsia-colored dress, as though to make a statement about how femme presentation belonged, even in the halls of power. The conservative theater surrounding her confirmation hearing portrayed her as a gender warrior, someone who should be celebrated for not fitting into the conventional mold of what a Supreme Court justice looks like. Never mind that she had been part of a religious group that referred to women as handmaids. Republican Senator Marsha Blackburn had used Barrett's confirmation as an opportunity to scold paternalistic, progressive critics for not entering the hearing with an open mind. Blackburn, who refers to gender-affirming care for trans youth as child mutilation, was suddenly all about criticizing gender roles. Barrett's critics, Blackburn said, must believe only certain kinds of women would be allowed into this hearing room. Senator Joni Ernst, also a Republican, went so far as to suggest that feminists were like fundamentalists, punishing Barrett, just as women all over the world are punished, perceived and judged based on who someone else needs or wants us to be, not on who we actually are. Barrett herself liked to insist that she wasn't a woman who let other people tell her what to do or who to be. The academic and professional victories that led her to become the 6th woman ever nominated to the U.S. Supreme Court had happened because she was not the type of person to be cowed by sexism. It never occurred to her that anyone would consider girls to be less capable than boys, she said during her confirmation hearings. She had feminist advice ready at hand for those who, like the school-age granddaughters of a Republican senator, would ask for a memento. In their pocket constitutions, she had scrawled the words, "Dream big." Once I learned about Barrett's advice to young girls, she no longer seemed to belong to some topsy-turvy nightmare. Her words could, in fact, be heard on any given evening on my living room couch. I was dispensing the same advice to my daughter, literally. When I was pregnant with my first child, I had been gifted all the cliché bookish Brooklyn mom swag. Books with titles like Baby Feminists and A is for Activists. And ironically, especially in light of the fact that the Dobbs decision was around the corner, multiple books about Barrett's liberal predecessor, Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Even a bib that mimicked Ginsburg's famous dissent collar. One book in particular had become woven into our bedtime ritual. It was filled with pictures of intentionally diverse women overcoming obstacles. Harriet Tubman facing down the night with a lantern. Zaha Hadid with a pencil behind her ear building skyscrapers. Florence Griffith Joyner winning multiple gold medals. Its jewel tones, prominent faces, and bold lines were irresistible. So was its sing-song refrain. It was called Dream Big. Barrett's embrace of freedom for women wasn't from the conservative playbook. Barrett was taking pages from the feminist playbook now. The same one I was reading. The same one I was reading to my daughter. The call was coming from inside the house. My house, to be precise. And any long-term strategy feminists were going to craft after Dobbs was going to have to face this fact. Feminist ideas are powerful, perhaps more powerful than they have ever been.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?